Hello and welcome to CS230. This is Lecture 6, Lesson 3. I'm going to continue with manipulating our database object here. And I'm calling it database object because we will see in the future lectures that a lot of the material that we get and take from databases comes back in a form like this. And sometimes we'll see that it's something that looks like JSON, JavaScript object notation. Then it looks a bit like this as well. So I'm trying to get you familiar with using and seeing these kind of constructs here. Okay, this one is slightly different. I'm really going, well, all I'm going to do with this one here is I'm going to get back to the example that we had originally, where I just had my Dungeons and Dragons classes. I click my button to show the classes, and I get this list again. So we're not going to go into the complex um, example where we were generating the selection box and updating a div and so forth. All that does is just all that it shows that you can do as you iterate over data in an array or in a list, that you can do something with that and make it work the way you want. So I'm not really I'm not concerned with repeating all that. What I do want to do in this particular one here is want to show you how we generate this kind of list or this kind of presentation um, uh, by manipulating and working with the simple base database array here, and this time we want to do it using map function. Okay, so I want to build on the material that we did with map. So the last example, if you go back and see, we were looking at a lot of for loops. So we had show classes here. We had lots of for. We were iterating over the classes. We were doing all sorts of for something in, and code's a little bit complex. We'll see it again. So really, what I want to do now is I want to come to version 3 and have a look at this. Okay, so we basically start with this piece of code, and we want to replace it with this piece of code, and I want to talk you through that and show how you can basically replace all of your for manipulation over and replace them with maps. Okay, so let's look at the data that we had here. This time I'm actually creating a class array. I'm using my square brackets here. I'm closing my square brackets, and then I'm just separating them by each of the object strings, or the object definitions are here, separated by commas. Okay, chain brackets separated by commas. You'll notice that I have the character class back in again, whereas in the previous example, I took it out because I actually had it from the name of the key, and it was also part of the value. And it was a bit clunky, that's why I took it out, so because otherwise I'd have to skip over it when I was presenting it and so forth. But this time, everything is much neater. I'm pulling out the information for this class as primary. So essentially, character class is the primary key here, or the ID, if you wanted to call it that way. So because they're unique, and then all the other ones depend on this one. So it is like a key value, a primary key value, and the rest are just attributes of the key. So it's nice, it's okay to do. So what we want and what we did, let's have a look what we did previously. So we want to show all the classes. So we start off with a sample string that we're going to build up this list, and we iterate over all the class. So we're looking at for each. Now this time we're looking at for each, whereas previously we were looking at, because this was an array, object, sorry, then we had to use for the key in the class. So now that was a bit, we can be a little less clunky here, and we just say for each. So what it tells us is that for every single element in, here's the for each, here's the function that's defined. Okay, so we're applying the for each prototype essentially to the array method, and what it does is for every single element in the array, and each element is an object here, what we do is we end up applying this function to the element. Okay, we're calling it element here. We could have called it x if we wanted. And so all we're doing then is we know that element is an object, so we're able to loop through and pull out the various pieces of detail here. So the element of car class is the first one, so we're taking that out first because we actually want to play with the first element, and we want to get the list. Now we go back and have a look at the list. We want to separate out the list to be in the top level, and then the next elements we want to have them as a sublist. Okay, so even though in the class itself, as you can see, they're just all created and have the same level of priority. So it's just something we have to do, and we have to get used to doing, is prioritizing and manipulating these records. Okay, so we want to get there. So let's go back to the code. So first thing we do is we take out the first one, and then we loop over all of the elements. And we say, well, if it's not the first one, then we'll build a sublist. So that's why we have this thing here. So that's what this for loop does. So it loops over all elements in the object that's selected, the current object that's selected, and it produces a kind of nice list that looks like this based on that. We close it, and then we update the list classes inner HTML, and that's our element that that sits down here. Okay, not too bad. That's how that one works, and let's just verify for ourselves that it works. Okay, we'll select and use this particular function. Make sure we save. Oops. Save, reload, run, and we get the list we expect. Okay, and I tend to do this. So if I'm writing a function one way and I want to refactor my code, I want to try to see, can I make it a little bit better, do something, I often then just replicate it, say show classes A, and I create a new one called show classes B. Now we do this with a map. So we had lots of loops going on in here. We had one loop, two loops going on in here. Now, if we look at this example, we actually have no loops at all. No for loops, no looping variables. We've used a map. Okay, and what we're doing this time is we're using a map function with the fat arrow construct, and we're also using template strings as well, so we can or template literals, okay, so our template strings, and allow us to be able to have strings encoded in backticks, and then we can specify expressions within that backticks to generate this. If you're familiar with C programming, for example, you will have done this, you've been doing this forever, for example. So we'll see about doing that. So this time what happens is we have a single variable which is in the map. So we are using the fat arrow, so there's no function definition, and the variable here is a object, and we're telling it that the object, each of the parts, because we know we're passing the object around, so we're mapping them and putting them onto the names that we know within that object. Okay, and we'll notice that what map does then is that it actually returns this string that's constructed, where we position each of these wrapped in their appropriate padding or of HTML elements. And this is the expression, so we can access the value of this particular property in this, internally in the string. It's really nice. That generates all that very nicely for us. And then we use the join function to join them together with no string. We can choose a string in between, but we don't want any spaces. So we just join everything together, and then we just close our loop, or sorry, close our list. And then we just update again. So it's really, really nice. You might say, oh, there's lots of variables in here. There's not. There's one. There's one variable. It's whatever's inside this loop here. Okay, and you may not have seen that, but you can actually do that as a parameter. It's still a single parameter, but it's just mapped onto the various elements here. Okay, fat arrow, no return because it's a single line with the single return statement, and then we're doing this for every single record, sub-record in the database or array, if you like, and then we join them together, and it's really nice, looks really sweet, and works very well. Okay, so this really is just building on what we did previously. Sorry, it's called B. I beg your pardon. Let's call this one. Okay, run, and it works, and it's nice. I think this is easier to read than this. There's less looping, there's less fuss. We can generate this whole notion of where do I add on the strings, or where do I add on the LIs, how do I embed them, and this concatenation. This is so much nice. So using map, using join, using an array of database objects, using template literals, we can get together and generate HTML in a much neater way. So we could, in principle, go back now and look at this long function here and replace it with a map-based version. But I'm not going to do that. I think you might like to practice and try that yourselves. So that's it. That's what we've done. It's a nice, quick exercise. Definitely worth trying, and I'd recommend that you try it yourself. I'd recommend that you play with the example and extend it and try to replicate what you did in the previous lesson. Okay, thank you very much for watching.